Okay, good evening, everyone. Or actually, it's only afternoon for you, isn't it? My name's David Hallam, and I'm going to be taking this session, which I've entitled Unleash the Chatbot. Okay, so first of all, a few words about me, just so that you know where I'm coming from and a little bit more about myself. So I'm a teacher. I teach both junior high and high school computer science at one of the many international schools in Prague in the Czech Republic. And a few other things about me that you may find a little bit helpful, interesting to know. As you can see from my grey hair, I've been teaching computing courses for a long time, since 1988. It's interesting as to what has stayed the same and what has changed over the years. I usually joke that if you want to have people think that you are coming with something new and groundbreaking and different, just look and see what was being taught 10, 20, 30, or even 40 years ago. We'll get back to that in a minute. My camera seems to be playing up a little bit, so please bear with me on that. In the meantime, I'm always looking for new ideas, new ways of teaching technology, and particularly I'm looking for things that are relevant to my students and which answer their questions and help meet their needs. But yes, I've been using Scratch since 2007. So on the right-hand side of the screen is my first Scratch project that I uploaded to the website in May 2007. There's a link on it that if you get a chance to look at the original slides, then the hyperlink will take you to that actual Scratch project. But I'm going to move on to my next slide. Okay, so the big question, what is so special about ChatGPT? So simple question that, again, it'd be useful that if anyone wants to say anything in the chats, then please feel free to do so. Have you ever written a simple chatbot? Now, for me, it's an exercise that I often do with my 13, 14-year-olds in Scratch. With my older students, I will often do it with other languages. And it's a very, very useful way to get across a number of key computing concepts, including validation of data and using lists. Another one you may want to think about with that is, have you ever created a poetry generator? And I did a presentation recently for Code Week where I pointed out that Seymour Papert, whose work we all owe a great deal of gratitude to for pioneering the types of ideas and concepts that we use within Scratch. Seymour Papert in the late 70s and early 80s was doing computer-generated poetry with students in a classroom setting. And if you've not read Mindstorms, then look it up and get excited about it. What about Mad Libs? These fill-in-the-blank story generators. And of course, the big question I have is, if you've not done something like this, then why not? These are all fun things to do, and certainly with my older junior high students, they're the sort of things that will get them excited. But these are, if you like, the basic building blocks that we experiment with. Modern large language models take this idea and take it a whole lot further. And so in today's session, all I'm going to do is try and give you an idea of some of the things that we can do with a large language model and how the output from something like ChatGPT can help us make the most of the time we have with our students working with Scratch. So what's so special about it? First of all, I'm going to deal with the other side of this, which is what can't it do? And the obvious thing that Scratch won't do, and on the right-hand side of the screen, I've got a little example of an exchange I had with ChatGPT, where I asked it if it could write a Scratch program for me. And although it can't write my Scratch code, it can do some other things for me. One obvious one is that I can get it to list the different essential features I would need for writing a particular type of game. So in the example that I've got there, it starts with the Space Invaders game. Another one that I've done with some of my students, just to get them thinking, is just say, okay, we all know how to write a simple Pong game. And if we don't, there are plenty of projects we can remix out there. But what if we wanted to add something new, exciting, and different to our Pong game to make it more interesting? What could we do? And again, it's very good for just being a sounding board of ideas, some of which you can say, yeah, I like that one, I'm going to work with that one, and others that you might say, no, that sounds a little bit too difficult, or that's not really going to take the game in the direction I want it to go in. But this is a good thing, that it will generate all of these different ideas for you. Another possibility for you, again, one of the things I often do with my students, because it works well with many of them, and there are different approaches. If you prefer to use a presentation program to do interactive fiction, choose your own adventure stories, that's a great way of doing it. But there are certain advantages to doing interactive fiction or an adventure game in Scratch that you don't have if you use something like Google Slides or PowerPoint. Big advantages, of course, that you can keep track of different items, keep track of whether you've encountered someone before within the game. And so one of the bigger challenges that some of my students have is that they would like to be able to create an adventure game, but they don't necessarily have the writing skills. And so one of the things you can do, and we could explore this one later if we wanted to. I've got an example that we can look at. One of the things that you can do is just get it to create the different locations for a text adventure. You, of course, can then think, oh, yes, we could now try drawing what this looks like, or finding images that would suit with this. We can decide what instructions, what choices can the user make from the text that's been given, and then build up our game that way. And so for some of you might say, yeah, that sounds fun. I can see why you're saying it won't create a text adventure game for me, but it will give me some material that I can work with. I'm going to continue with what it can't do and point out that it can't actually make images. It won't even tell you the location of an image. But what it can do is it can create the content of an SVG file. Now, it can also create the content for CSV files. So if you wanted to make a quiz and you want a text file created as a comma-separated variable file with questions and answers, then yes, it will create one of those for you nicely and easily. But it will, if you've got the patience, and this to me is one of the key things to point out about working with large language models. I refer to it as trying to teach a toddler geometry. And so you can ask it to come up with the SVG code, which is just going to be a plain text file. You can copy that, save it into something like Notepad, and then upload the SVG file to your Scratch program as a costume for a sprite. Now, it's fairly good at doing simple geometric patterns, but, well, there's an exercise for you. Try asking it to draw a purple cat with a pink nose and white whiskers and a curly tail. And be underwhelmed as to what it will create. It will create something for you.
David, we have a request from a viewer if you could speak a little bit louder.
Okay, I will speak a little bit louder, hopefully. Oh, that's interesting. So the new version is going to give you a list of blocks. I must admit, I will try that again and see whether my version of Scratch will do that for. I'm going to move on to, though, what is Scratch good for? Or what is ChatGPT good for in Scratch? And to me, this is the key. This is what I like about ChatGPT, it generates large amounts of text, which you can use in your programming project without having to worry about who owns that text, whether you need to get a license fee, who you need to attribute, how you need to attribute it, or who you need to attribute it to. You can just use this text with very few limitations. So again, we've done things like website design projects, and it's great for creating articles for that. If you want to create a magazine, again, you can do amazing things with creating large amounts of content that, as I said, you don't need to worry about who the original owner was, at least not at this point. So it can tell stories. You can ask it to write a story for you on a subject, and it will come up with an example for you. You can get it to create the ideas for a storyboard. Again, it won't create the images for the storyboard, but if you're thinking, I want to create a 1-minute animation, and I need some ideas as to what the different parts of the animation could include. Again, I found it quite useful for doing that. And again, saying to my students, right, what could you do with this? Composing poems and songs. Again, great for filler for a magazine or a website, but it also means that you can then decide, how do I want to perform this? And we'll talk about that in a minute. And it can write articles, it can create the outlines for presentations. And again, that's another fun one to think about, particularly, as I said, since it will also create SVG content for you. So let's have some fun. So I've just put together 3 activities: a story, a poem, or presentation. Pick a topic. So I put down 3 topics: summer holidays, writing computer games, making a presentation. And then pick an output method. Would you prefer, and again, it's interesting to see what my students do with this. Some say, yeah, I like the idea of recording my own voice. Some, of course, when they start then working with the features in Scratch, they think, oh, I can experiment with this and play around with this. Others, of course, immediately start saying, can I use something more sophisticated like Audacity and then import the MP3 files from that? Why not? Text-to-speech tools. Again, some of my students, they're shy. They're not so confident in reading, but the idea that they can create a piece of text which, because the computer's created it, they are happier with the punctuation and spelling, and they can then have it pronounced reasonably well using text-to-speech. Now, there's a few interesting things. I'll talk through that. I'll show you an example in a minute of something I've done before. But of course, the other thing you can do is you can put your text on the screen. So you can stamp individual characters, or if your text is below 300 characters, you could clone individual characters on there. We've been doing some work on computer-generated poetry with my classes, looking at the differences between what we can create using our own software in Scratch and looking at the things that ChatGPT will create for us. And one of the things that I've been showing my students is that, yeah, you can either stamp or have cloned characters on the screen. The big advantage of the cloned characters is you can then have them moving independently. So now that I've shown them that, their next question is concrete poetry. So poems that make different shapes. What could we do with that in Scratch? Which sounds fun. That's my summer project to play with. Okay, so this is the end of the formal part of the presentation. But let's have some fun. That's taken about 15 minutes to do. So that gives us 45 minutes to do some playing. So I'm going to start by showing you a couple of things that we've done and that some of you may decide, yeah, that sounds interesting and fun. I'm going to start with a musical poem. So hopefully, in terms of the audio, you'll be able to hear this. I think the audio is a little bit quiet because I set the audio settings to be reasonably quiet on this, but it will also caption the text as well. I'll show you inside in this in a minute.
In the realm of coding,
where wonders arise,
programming unfolds,
a joyous surprise,
with lines of logic,
we weave a design,
and in the dance of code,
endless fun we find,
arrays,
like treasure chests.
with
Stop the poem there because I want to show you a little bit about what I've done inside this. And yes, I can pop a link to this one in the
I got it, David.
in the chat. Just give me a second.
I put it in, David. You're all set.
Oh, thank you. Brilliant.
You're
Okay. Right. So just to show you a couple of things inside this so that you can see what I've done. So in terms of the music, as you can see, it's just playing a bass drum for a number of beats and resting for a number of beats, and playing a snare drum and again resting between there. The notes, you'll notice I'm using a list for. I've kept the list open there. It's not the only list on this. You'll see poem and poem 2 in a second, so I can talk you through that. But all it's doing is it plays the notes one at a time, and then it shifts the note up just by a couple, and then plays the same melody again. So that's how I get slightly. I think it's not brilliant, but my kids actually loved it. So I thought, well, I will show it to everyone here and see what you think. And here is the poem. And it was created by ChatGPT with a comma between each half of each line. So I thought, that's great. I can, one of the things that some of you may have noticed, and I will show you in a minute in case you haven't, is that when you upload from an from a CSV file into a list, because all you need to do is just right-click and then choose to upload your text from there, and it will ask you what column you want to upload, which I find really, really useful, really helpful. And as you can see, all I'm doing is I'm using the text say blocks to say each line of the poem, whilst over here in this block, if I scroll this way, you can see I've got the two different voices, and all it's doing is just repeating for however many lines there are in the poem, so that each speaker speaks a line of the poem. Then the other speaker speaks, and then they go on to the next line and the next line. And it works reasonably well. And it's the sort of thing that, as I said, as a middle school project, my 8th graders certainly enjoyed playing around with stuff. They also enjoyed making their own computer-generated poems as well. So depending on your class, you may find that's the sort of thing that they would be interested in. I'm going to move to another project. So I shall remember to paste a link. My video seems to be going funny again. Anyway, I'll see if I can sort that out, but I'm just going to show you another example of something that I've done. So I'm going to switch over to this tab, the Chatbot Story Hour. And again, all I did with this was I asked ChatGPT to create some short stories. And again, you could do all sorts of things with these. You could put them into a book. You could make a magazine. You can put them as content on a website. But I thought, no, we want the Scratch Cat to tell the stories. And so each time I press the green
Welcome
flag,
to Chatbot Story Hour. Once upon a time, there was a curious child named Max who loved taking things apart to see how they worked. One day,
just going to pause there. Hopefully you appreciate my pause and resume button there.
Max became convinced that there must be magic elves living inside his phone.
So this was my prompt to ChatGPT. I just told it, write me a story about a child who thought that there were magic elves living inside his phone, and that's how they made the pictures that appeared on his phone when he used the camera feature. And so it makes up a little story. If I press the green flag.
Welcome to Chatbot Story Hour. Once upon a time, there was a curious and imaginative child named Lily who loved to browse the internet in search of interesting stories. One day, she came across a spoof website that claimed to have uncovered a secret plot by cats to take over the world.
And again, that was the prompt in this case. That's again, they're all on e-safety type features. In this case, yes, I asked ChatGPT to write a story about a child who read on a website that cats were going to take over the world. And this is the story it came up with. And again, if I just show inside so you can see all that's gone in with this. And so I have two lists. One list, as you can see, is just every single line of each of my different stories. And then I have another line here, another list here that just tells me which line the next story starts at, so that the Scratch program will start at the starting point, and then it will finish at the first line of the next story. Simplest thing to do is if I just switch on a couple of variables so you can see this working. So there's start, there's story, there's stop. And so if I now press my green flag again.
Welcome to Chatbot Story Hour. Once upon a time, there was a curious and welcome
Lily
to
again.
Chatbot Story Hour. Once upon a time, there was a chatbot named Eva. Eva was designed to help people with their daily tasks, answer their questions, and provide general assistance. She was programmed to learn from her interactions and improve over time, becoming more and more efficient as she gathered more data. Eva loved her job. She enjoyed helping people and learning new things.
But there's a twist in the tale, and if you want to find out what that twist is, obviously you'll just have to listen to Chatbot Story Hour to find out. And so this was a fun one to do. And again, once I'd shown my students that this was my approach to this, immediately some of my students started trying to come up with their own interactive resources where, again, the text-to-speech tools would say what they'd put in on different different values for each line of their list. It's worth pointing out that one thing I had to do with this is that there is a limit to the number of characters that you can put within a variable for the where it says speak. And so this is one of the reasons why it pauses at each comma, because that keeps my text into a small enough set of chunks that the Scratch can cope with. Anyway, I am going to go back to what I was talking about with having some fun here. So, story, poem, presentation, summer holidays, writing computer games, or making a presentation, and then record your own voice, text-to-speech, or stamping or cloning characters. Okay, so I'm just going to show you some of the things I've done within ChatGPT earlier today, so that we can say, yeah, that sounds like a fun idea. If I see anything in the chat saying, please, 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 can we try this or that? Otherwise, I will choose one of these and say, this is how I would put this together. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to, here's what I did with ChatGPT this morning. So the first thing I said is, okay, write me a story. So my prompt was just, write a story about a cat who visits the seaside for the first time and is helped by a writing computer program when he experiences a problem with a seagull on a beach. And so it's made a nice little story for me. And again, one of the things I could do would just be to record my voice reading that story out paragraph by paragraph and then work with it. Obviously, one of the nice things with that is that you can then add some animation to it and then trigger that animation at different points in the story. Okay, a CSV file. So I asked it earlier on if it would...
David, sorry to interrupt. We have a question from the group, from Dawn Mercurius. She's asking, what about a live chat bot connecting ChatGPT?
That would be an interesting one to do, but that would be beyond my abilities at the moment and beyond what we've got within Scratch at the moment. Obviously, there may be people working on useful extensions that would do something like that. The best thing, as I said at the moment, is the fact that we can use ChatGPT to create content for us that we can then use within our projects. If you want to create a simple chatbot, again, simple chatbots are absolutely, oh, thank you. There is a plugin already. Again, if anyone can put links to these things, it would be useful, so that, thank you. Okay, so here is my CSV file. And so all I need to do is copy that CSV file. And then, as I said, I'm just going to use Notepad at home here. And I'm just going to save that CSV file, the plain text file. I'll come back to that in a minute. Anyway, other ones, as I was saying, if the idea of creating a text gets you going, then I asked it to create 8 different locations. And again, I can copy each of these bits of text. Just a quick example, if I just take the text from here, and then all I'm going to do is create a new Scratch project. So here I am with this one. Again, all I need to do is, you can decide what would work best with your project. Would it work best working with the stage or working with a sprite? I'm going to work with the stage here for this one. So I've got my text. So I'm just going to open up a text block. Yeah, my screen has suddenly done something funny there. Let me just stop sharing that screen. And let me try sharing this screen instead. Okay. Okay, all I'm doing at the moment is I'm just testing to make sure as to why my screen suddenly went all funny there. In the meantime, just switching over to something that I do have. So let me just paste this in here. This is one that I must remember to share. Okay, and this is just, again, something that many of you will have done before in the past. If I put some text in, and then click on there, you'll see it's typed some text on the screen. What I did this morning with this one, just to have a little bit of fun, is if I click on See Inside on this one, let me just go to my code blocks. So I created a block called ScreenWrite, which, as you can see, has 4 parameters. So text, X, Y for the XY location for it starts, and also the size of my text. So if I decide I want my text to be bigger, then obviously I can change the size of my text in this part here. So if I change this to 40 and then type hello world, as you can see, it's put my text up there. This is me just having some fun earlier today, thinking, what if I was to use my own handwriting to create a very simple font? And so I literally just drew by hand my letters of the alphabet in both lowercase and uppercase as different costumes for this, plus a series of symbols and numbers. And as you can see, it's not perfect. I could do with making my lowercase e perhaps a little bit smaller there. And this is the beauty of this. I can take this and just say, right, let's just tweak that. Let's just move that down a little as well. And now if I do the green flag and I do hello world again, my E is a little bit nicer there. I can move it a little bit to the right. And that's looking a little bit nicer. Okay, so anyway, the reason why I bring this up is, again, getting back to, yes, we've got a chatbot. We can get it to write stories for us, tell jokes, and so on. Why don't we? Let me just go back to the ChatGPT and get it to write a joke about summer holidays. Okay. Let me see if I can get a nicer one. Okay, let's work with that. So why did the beach towel go on a summer holiday? So let me go back to my screenwriter here. And let me create a list. And my first joke. And another list of punchlines. Oops, no, we don't want to put the same thing in there. And suddenly realized I'm working. So here I am with my punchlines. So it's that in there. That's a bit too long, so I'm just going to make it because it didn't want to be wrapped up in any drama. And obviously I can get my Scratch Cat to say that. And of course, as you see, the advantage here is that I can have lots and lots of random jokes and punchlines. And all I need to do is just get my Scratch Cat to say this. And if I want to, I can have a different character. So let me just add another sprite. I'm just going to hide those two lists now I've got them there. I'm going to change the direction that my dog is facing, which means, of course, I must remember to set my rotation style to left, right. So when I press my green flag, oops, I want my dog to say item 1 of jokes, and then afterwards we'll see whether we can then, if I've got time, get it to type it on the screen as well for me. So on my looks blocks, and then my cat, when the green flag is pressed, again I want to use the looks blocks. And I want it to say the punchline for 5 seconds. But obviously I want there to be a delay in, so and then the last thing I need to do is remember to switch off that one for now. So why did the beach child go on a summer holiday? And then because it didn't want to be wrapped up in any drama. Okay, obviously I can get it to create lots of jokes. And I could then have it so that every time I press it, it takes a random joke and then says that random joke. But since I've got my little screenwriter block here, then I can also use my screenwriter block and also if I remember to erase my text. And as you can see, unfortunately, it's going to go over the edge there. So I would need to be able to wrap it. Obviously, I can change the size of my text. But of course, this is one of the problems. If I make it that small, Yeah, it's sort of readable.
David, can you drop in
Yes.
the URL for the project again? It's cut off on
Yeah,
your screen, and
sure.
the one you shared
No
goes
problem.
to a different project. Thank you.
This is the project I'm working on at the moment. And again, just to illustrate what I meant about recording your own voice. Why did the beach towel go on the summer holiday? And then doing the cat. Because it didn't want to be wrapped up in a load of drama. And if I want to, I can play around with some of the features here. So if I make this one faster.
Because it didn't want to be wrapped up in a load of drama.
I can take my dog one there and make that slower.
Why did the beach towel go on the summer holiday?
And so now if I go back to this, of course, your big problem here is that if you're going to be recording a lot of these, obviously you need to choose names for your recordings that are fairly easy for the program to be able to come up with, or make a list of your different recording names so it can call up each recording. Anyway, let's go back to the code blocks and add the code blocks to this. And let's see how it sounds.
Why did the beach towel go on the summer holiday?
Because it didn't want to be wrapped up in a load of drama.
Okay, so there we go. Okay, what I will do is that I created a Scratch Studio to go along with this. So if I put
David,
a
we have
link,
a few others who are asking for the link to your project, saying that the one you
Yeah.
shared doesn't have anything in it.
right. Okay, I'm putting a link to the studio now.
We also have a comment here from one of our illustrious engineers in the chat saying that if you click Save Now, top right, that could help with the delay that folks might be seeing on their end.
Okay,
Thanks, Chris.
right. There we go. I'm also putting a link to the musical poem in the studio now as well. Okay, so within Studio, there should be the Chatbot Story Hour, simple screenwriter thing with an example of both recording and just the standard speech block, and then the musical poem. The one thing I haven't done is do a live rendition of doing the text to speech. Might have just enough time. To show you what I mean with this. Again, let's take another one. Let's have making a presentation on the advantages and disadvantages of having the summer vacation. And so again, I asked ChatGPT, create a presentation for me. So it's created a presentation for me. And again, if I wanted to, although there are issues, obviously it'd be nice if this behaves itself today, but I'll show you some of the things that's okay. I can see a question about plagiarism risks. Is an interesting one. Certainly, certain examination boards have made it quite clear that they are more than happy for you to use stuff that's been generated by a chatbot as a source, provided you document that it is something that you have used that's been generated from that, so that you're effectively using it. And of course, this to me is the big thing, that we're not using our content here as a quote. We're not using it as the actual content. The important thing about what we're doing as coders here is that we're having fun creating our own software to be able to bring that textual content to life. We're not interested in, I mean, I've been exploring and experimenting with code generation with ChatGPT, and I'm not impressed yet. There's been far too many interesting mistakes I've found from code generated by it. It's much, much better at finding errors in my Python code or in my JavaScript code than it is at coming up with original ideas, which is what you'd expect from a large language model. Anyway, so I can take an SVG file of my text. But
David, I just want to note that we have about 5 minutes before the session.
Yes. What happens if I go to costumes here and I say I want to upload that SVG file? So if I click on upload costume and present at .svg, and oh look, there's what it hopes is going to be my presentation. But when I try and shrink it and resize it, all of my text has suddenly become bunched up at the top. Now, of course, it's still great for me to be able to move these bits and pieces around, lay them out however I want. But obviously it's not the same. Again, if I just do a quick, another example, upload my costume, my squares that I did from my, whoops. There's my grid of 9 squares. From my SVG file I got to generate there. Sadly, yes, we're coming close to the end now. The SVG code, it will generate the SVG code, but as you can see, it's still not as good as we would like. But for some students who are thinking in terms of they would like to be able to mess around with layouts, who aren't so confident in working with language, it can be a great help to them. The one thing we've not spent time looking at and thinking about is, of course, the accuracy of what ChatGPT comes up with, which is why I much prefer the idea of asking it to create something fictional rather than something factual. Factual material, again, you would have to then have your students check to make sure that what ChatGPT has come up with is actually real. Okay, hopefully that was helpful. If there are any final questions, then please put them in the chat now and we'll see what we can do with them.
Thanks very much, David, and thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon or this evening or this morning, depending on where you are.
Okay, final thank you to everyone for the really nice positive feedback, and I'm glad that for many of you it's given you some ideas to play with and experiment with over the summer